All right. All right, good evening. It's nice to see some familiar faces on the screen and some new ones. Appreciate everyone joining us this evening. My name is Quinn Gardner. I'm the emergency manager for the city of San Rafael. I'm gonna have my team introduce themselves here in a minute. But again, just a reminder that we are gonna record this session so it's available to folks afterwards. So if you don't wanna be recorded, go ahead and turn your camera off. I will stop the recording prior to taking Q&A, so you can turn your cameras back on and re-engage at that point. Please remember to keep yourself muted. The chat feature is enabled, so if anything pops in your mind as we're going through and you're worried you might forget it, go ahead and put your questions or comments in the chat, but we'll probably hold off to the end until we start addressing those. I've got a few questions that came in prior that we've built in kind of responses into the presentation. And with that, I'm going to ask Kate and then Simon to go ahead and introduce themselves, and then we'll start the presentation.
Thanks for that, Quinn. Hi, everyone. My name is Kate Anderson. I'm a vegetation management specialist with City of San Rafael. And in addition to my work here, I come to San Rafael with a background in forestry and land management. I'm also a California registered professional forester.
Thanks, Kate. I am Simon Wright. I'm also a vegetation management specialist here for San Rafael. And I have a degree in forestry and natural resources with an emphasis on wildland fuels and fire management from Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo. And I'm also a San Rafael native, so happy to be here and happy to see you all.
Great, thanks Kate and Simon. We're super lucky to have them on the team as well as our other full-time and seasonal staff. We'll talk about how we all work together as we go through the presentation. We'll go ahead and get started. This first picture, of course, is downtown San Rafael, but you can actually see a burn scar in the background, which of course the hill is unfortunately all too common. And we're going to talk about all the different things we're doing because of that as we go through this presentation and other reasons. So our overview for today, our goal with this presentation is really to help our residents to provide updates and help you understand our process and our progress. So we're going to go through the how and the why. How do we make decisions about what we're doing as it relates to wildfire prevention? Why are we doing certain things? And then you're going to see kind of a theme where we start as close to home as we can with personal preparedness, and then we start working out through defensible space and home hardening to evacuation, and then lastly into that open space and city managed areas. And we'll provide some updates on all the different things we're doing and asking you to do as it relates to each of these. To get started, though, I wanted to really emphasize this 360 approach. And so this graphic is actually from the California Fire Safe Council, but this idea of fire adapted communities is certainly not new, but it's becoming more and more formalized. And actually our wildfire action plan, our 38-point plan that was adopted officially in 2020, although it was a 2.5-year process or so to write that plan and go through community feedback, really takes that 360 approach as well. So on this next slide here, you can see I've added all these arrows for the different things on that outer rim that we are doing. So there's still a few that we're looking forward to. Personally, prescribed fire maybe being one of those, but we've got a little bit of groundwork to do before we can get our landscape ready to handle those types of things. But we are already working through code changes, working with our communities. That top one, community meeting and events, we're here right now. Looking at different ways to become fire-wise communities, home hardening, talking about evacuation, go kits, all sorts of good information around here. And a lot of that is things we have actively in progress right now. And that's what you see indicated by those arrows. So one of the questions we always get is kind of this idea of how do we prioritize? How do we make decisions? Why are we doing what we're doing? And so again, I kind of mentioned this to start, but we start at that individual level. So already this month, we've done a couple different 1-hour to get ready classes. Those are recorded and available on YouTube. So if you're interested, and I'll put the link in the chat here in a little bit. And that really focuses on personal preparedness and the things that we need all residents to do to be ready for a wildfire or any disaster. And then we start moving into this house out approach, and that specifically relates to wildfire, but it also relates to you getting ready for any disaster. So the areas closest to your home are the most vulnerable. They're going to have the biggest impact should a fire come through the area. And then we also start looking at where the houses are. Where do they relate in terms of what our local weather patterns are, what our topography features are. And then lastly, we look at, and not lastly, it's equally important, those further to outrings, ignition potential and fire history. So as an example, you'll see a lot of the work we've done in the last 6 months has been focused on San Rafael Hill in the San Rafael Lincoln Hill neighborhoods because of the historic fire history there, as well as the proximity to homes, to the open space, as well as the difficulty in some of those cases to achieve and maintain defensible space, evacuation challenges, et cetera. So we look at all these things together as we kind of come up with our game plan and work through things.
Yeah.
So what is the process when we decide, hey, this is the area that we've got a concern about, what are we going to do about it? Of course, that starts with that risk assessment. And sometimes this is coming from neighbor complaints or concerns, that folks alerting us to concerns. Some of that risk assessment might be spurred by fires or historic fires. And then a lot of it is, and specifically I asked Kate and Simon to join us because of their natural resource background and their ability to see the landscape in a risk, looking at it with a risk lens. And so through that risk assessment, we then come up with a work plan, and that of course incorporates a budget. And that work plan then goes to the Marine Wildfire Prevention Authority, which is the Measure C, or your fire funds, that was passed about 1.5 years ago. And that's really how we're funding a lot of this work. So there are some regulatory things that have to happen through that Joint Powers Agreement, that JPA, as well as through CEQA and other environmental laws. So we get the work plan and the budget initially approved, and then we start our environmental compliance. And this is going to involve biological surveying, nesting surveying, looking for historic areas that we need to preserve, looking at any watershed issues or anything relating to water. And then of course, native, non-native species, things like that. And then we put all of that paperwork together, we file it, and then that actually goes back to the MWPA for another approval. And every time I say back to the MWPA, I think it's important to know that those are public meetings. So you get the information, the public is welcome to participate in those meetings and provide feedback. And then once we get that final approval on the environmental compliance components, we can start the bidding, the contracting, identifying timelines with contractors, and then we really get to work, right? And that's the point where I think we're all really excited about. Those are when we start seeing the impacts of our work, but there are some things we have to do, of course, before that. And then after, some of these projects will be phased. So you might see a project get completed and say they should do more. And some of that, again, comes back to that risk assessment. We have a lot of places across the city we have to touch, or some of that might be because the next layer of work is incorporated into our maintenance plan. And so you'll see some site maintenance going on as the years progress as well. And then on the right there, I have this public outreach. And throughout this whole process, like I mentioned, our MPA meetings, our risk assessments incorporate public feedback. And then when we start to get to work on projects, we also incorporate public outreach throughout those processes. And I'll talk about that on a few specific projects here in a minute. But again, coming back right to yourself, to that personal preparedness, how do you get information? And so I want to just take a couple minutes. I don't think I ever do a presentation where I don't talk about emergency alerts. They're so important. They answer the question, how am I going to know? How am I going to know what to do? And I have here this little blurb that says redundancy is key. And we saw this after the 5-day power outage a few years ago. We don't always know exactly what's going to work and what's not going to work. So we want to have redundant systems. So Alert Marin is the primary system in the county. It is an opt-in system. You do need to register, and you register by your address. And the address is really important because then when we have an evacuation warning or an evacuation order, we can actually draw the map, and the addresses that are within that area will get that direct alert. So we use Alert Marin for action. We also have Nixle, which a lot of people have signed up for. That's when you text your zip code to 888-777. So if you're not sure which one you signed up for, if you never went online to a website, you're probably only signed up for Nixle. Nixle, we have to send by zip code. So it's much broader information. We can't be as specific to say these 2 streets need to evacuate because we're sending it to an entire zip code. So we do have redundancy and we have 2 different systems, but we use them for different purposes. So Alert Marin for action, Nixle for information. The NOAA weather radios are great redundancy tools. Again, that's going to be used on a much broader scale because the radios will broadcast to the entire county, but they're plugged in all the time and silent unless there's an emergency alert that comes through. And that's going to be on a large scale incident. There's an example of one there. Everyone's like, what's a NOAA weather radio look like? It's that little graphic that says tornado. They've been around for decades in the Midwest for tornado warnings. And recently the Weather Service agreed to support wildfire alerts with them as well. So it's a great tool. There was a pilot project last year. We distributed hundreds of radios across the community. I think we might still have a few left if anybody's interested. And they're also available to purchase for about, I think, $20 or $30, but they have backup batteries in them. So you keep them plugged in, but if your power goes out, they've got some AA redundancy. So you've got that built in. And then this last link is really important. It's a fairly new website that the county is really asking us to push, is this emergency portal. So that was used during the Lucas Valley fire just a few weeks ago. And through that, they actually put maps of where the evacuation areas were and things like that. So if you're kind of, where am I going to get my information? I'm not sure which sources to trust. This Marin Public Emergency Portal is that source that we want everybody to have. And any alert that goes out helps feed into that website. There's mapping tools built into it. It's active now. You're welcome to take a look at it in its current form. So make sure you're signed up for your emergency alerts and that you have those redundancies. And I'd also add with Alert Marin, you can add multiple addresses. So if you have kids or grandkids or parents that live in a different area and you also want to receive alerts for them, or maybe you're a caretaker for someone, you can put multiple addresses in so you'll be alerted whenever that occurs. And then we've got this is more of a staying informed slide. So this is the emergent, time-sensitive information. And then we get into, here's some other ways you can stay informed. So the Pulse Point app was launched about a year ago. You can actually see every fire and medical call in the county happening, where all of our units are. It's also designed that if you want to set it up to send you alerts, it'll alert you if someone's within, I believe, 100 yards or so of you and needs cardiac assistance, and you can help perform CPR until first help arrives. But it's also just a great resource whenever I get the question of, oh, why are all the ambulances and fire trucks going by my house? And I do this personally too. It's one of the tools I use even in professional capacity. I'll just check Pulse Point. Oh, there's a medical emergency in this general area or whatever the case may be. So it's a great way to stay informed. Of course, social media, Twitter and Instagram probably provide the most quick information. You can see all the different handles for fire, the city, and police there. Especially during anything kind of significant, we'll often re-message each other. But certainly social media is a good place to get information. And then this newsletter piece, I really would encourage you guys to get subscribed, to add a minimum snapshot. It only goes out twice a month. It's an email newsletter, but it summarizes the city council agenda for the coming meeting, as well as critical actions taken in the past meeting. So a lot of times we'll hear from residents, I didn't know X, Y, or Z was happening. And my answer is, we went to city council, but a lot of people don't know how to stay informed about city council. So this newsletter makes it really simple. And then you can pick and choose if there's something you want to dive more into, or you want to contribute your feedback on and tune into a meeting. And then we also have Hot Shot, which is our fire newsletter that goes out on the same cycle. And that's going to have more information about major incidents that have occurred, all of our prevention efforts, things like that. So we don't spam you. It's only 2 a month to your email. And you can get subscribed from the city's website. Just click that subscribe and you can pick and choose what newsletters might make the most sense for you. And then lastly, and I'm pretty excited about this, Fire Watch is a new monthly TV show that was funded through the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority and produced by Fire Safe Marin. If anybody watched it, I'd love to hear your feedback, maybe in the Q&A section. The first episode was an hour, but it's a bunch of short segments. Future episodes will probably be closer to the 30-minute mark, but it's full of tons of different types of information. The first episode's theme was on embers and power and how to stay prepared. So why are we concerned about embers and how do we do things to address them? But I think it's a pretty fun format with a lot of good information. A new episode will be coming out every month. So Fire Watch, Marin, and then it's on the Fire Safe Marin website as well as YouTube. So I want to talk about evacuation now, and then we're going to dive into the defensible space piece because I think it relates so closely to emergency alerting. So we've got all of these different emergency alerts we talked about, and then how do they all tie into this evacuation potential? So there's a screenshot of the public emergency portal. On the bottom right is a screenshot from Zonehaven, which we just launched the public campaign, I think within the last 48 hours. So you guys are getting super fresh information. But they put together this really quick 3-minute video, and I think it summarizes everything we just talked about with alerts, as well as evacuation and personal preparedness really quickly. So I'd like to show you this video. Bear with me while I change technology and get to my other video here so I can show you that. Lost my Zoom. All right, I think we're going to be good to go. So someone give me a thumbs up if you can hear the audio.
Engine 1585, additional response for a vegetation fire in the area.
Hey Rich, good to see you. Let me tell you what I got cooking on this.
Okay.
So the wind's really starting to pick up. I want to activate the Zonehaven emergency management evacuation system. Immediate evacuation order to this zone right here. This is mil-E021.
Okay. I'll make the call to the County Emergency Operations Center, and they'll notify all the residents in that zone.
Perfect.
Hey, we have a fast-moving wildfire. We need to send out an evacuation order to all residents in zone mil-E021 through Alert Marin.
Okay, confirming you want evacuation order for Mill Valley E021. Okay, thanks.
All right, so I'm sending officers into zone mil-E021.
Yeah.
They're going to evacuate all the residents in that zone. I've also got officers going to major intersections to control traffic, and I'm going to be using Zonehaven to monitor that traffic in real time.
Okay, check the public emergency portal and all the information is updated with the evacuation order.
Hey, honey,
Yeah.
there's an awful lot of smoke in the sky.
Where?
It looks like it's coming from the south. Have you heard anything? Do you know what's going on?
No, but we could check Marin County's emergency website. I got a bookmark. Give me a second. Oh, look at, they're evacuating these two areas.
Oh my God.
Does anybody live near there?
Yeah, she lives right up there.
Did she send it for Alert Marin? Did she get
I don't
notified?
know. I've got to give her a call. She's got to get out of there now.
All right, and we got to get our go bag and just be ready. Come on.
Okay.
Our evacuation plan works. All the agencies in Marin use the Zonehaven platform to quickly and safely get people out of harm's way. We use Alert Marin to notify everybody that an evacuation is underway. Law enforcement agencies work together to manage traffic so fire crews can get in and residents can get out.
Zonehaven enables us to quickly evacuate residents and frees up our firefighters to control the fire. We are well prepared and trained to safely evacuate residents when necessary. But to help us keep you safe, we're asking you to do two things right now. Number one, subscribe to Alert Marin. Number two, know your zone. Check out emergency.marincounty.org, the county's emergency web portal, to familiarize yourself with your evacuation area.
Great. All right, so we're good. I think that video does a great job of kind of really summarizing how Alert Marin works with Zonehaven, works with the emergency portal, and then also, right, that personal responsibility element. as well as how fire and law enforcement work together. Of course, there's a few extra minutes in there. It takes a little bit of time sometimes to get some things done, but that's a great summary. That video is on YouTube. If you want to watch it again or share it with your friends, you are of course more than welcome to. We've also installed high-low sirens in all of our police vehicles in the city. So they make kind of a high-low noise, if you will. I won't imitate it. There's some videos out there you can watch. But it's a different siren than the normal siren. So when you hear that high-low, it's time to go. Again, a redundancy in alerting. Ideally, you got the emergency alert already, but we've got some redundancies built in. And then like we talked about, the county emergency portal. And so in addition to the things we're doing to make sure you know when or if it's time to evacuate, there's a lot we're doing to improve our evacuation routes. And again, this is all thanks to Measure C, or the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, the tax measure that was passed, that we're able to do this. So one, we're able to do a lot more with our personal education, encouraging everybody to come up with an evacuation plan. We're distributing evacuation checklists as part of our defensible space evaluations. So if you've had one of our evaluators or inspectors come to your door, one of the materials they have that they can leave you with is an evacuation checklist. In addition, pretty recently, this evacuation tag program was launched through Marin County Sheriff's Office and organized with all the law enforcement. And the idea with the tags is if you have to evacuate, you leave them somewhere visible, close to the road, and then the law enforcement or fire know that you're out, know that that's a safe place, and can continue on to potentially assist people that need more help. So if you don't have an evacuation tag yet, you can pick them up at the Public Safety Center. They're right outside in our lobby with a little explanation sheet. And then you want to keep those with your go bag and make that part of your evacuation plan, is to post that somewhere so folks know that you've left the area. And then we're also doing a lot of vegetation work along roadsides and in the medians. So you might notice a lot of juniper is getting removed from the medians across the city. I've got the lower image there that shows that, as well as the roadside projects. So we recently finished San Rafael Lincoln Hill. And what we're doing there is making sure we've got vegetation, especially particularly fire-prone vegetation, cut back and away from the roadway, which makes evacuations routes safer, because if it was on fire, the heat's not super close to the road. But it also improves visibility, helps create shaded fuel breaks. And then we're also clearing the space above the roadway to make sure our engines and everything can get through. Of course, vegetation grows. It's going to be an ongoing project to maintain this, but we're in a great initial stage here. And hopefully here in the next week or two, we're going to be starting the West End, Bristol Park, Bret Harte, Picnic Valley, Sun Valley, really a lot of those downtown neighborhoods with narrow streets up into the windy hills. And then we're going to move on to some additional neighborhoods as well. So we're really excited about that work. I think most of the median work is getting near completion. There's still a few spots left. And then after the roadside clearance projects, we're installing parking boxes. So this was part of our wildfire action plan that went to City Council almost 3 years ago when we started the process. There's some communities across Marin that have had these parking boxes for decades. But what it really does is clarify the very vague rule in San Rafael that says you can't park 6 feet from the center line. What is the center line, right? When there's no line on the roadway. And so this clarifies where that is, and it assures that there is going to be room for emergency vehicles to get through, even for regular emergencies, right? A medical or something that just happens on a more routine basis. There are some areas in the city that it is very difficult for our fire engines to get up. And if someone's parked inappropriately, it could potentially actually prevent an engine from accessing. So these parking boxes will clarify where you can park. If there's a box, it's safe to park there. If there's not a box, it's not safe. It was already probably illegal to park there because of that 6-foot rule, but the boxes help clarify it for everybody so we can maintain our emergency access as well as egress if we had to be evacuating folks. So lots of work happening as it relates to this and the different evacuation pieces. And a lot of work happening across the city as it relates to defensible space. So I'm going to turn it over to Simon to talk about our defensible space program.
All right, thank you, Quinn. Tying into the importance of alerts and evacuations, we have our topic of defensible space here. We'll move on to the next slide and cover what it is and how we can help you. So defensible space is basically, it's at least 100 feet around your structures. So not just your main house, but if you have a detached garage or an in-law unit in the back, those need their own defensible space as well. So it's at least that 100-foot buffer around structures to help prevent ignitions and to slow or stop the spread of wildfire. And it consists of basically just fire smart planting and ground covers. And really what's really important with this is the spacing and maintenance of your vegetation. And question we get a lot is, are we asking for clear cutting around homes or, within that immediate zone? We call the immediate zone, or we consider it to be the first 5 feet around your structures. And that's going to be the most important zone to maintain, with non-combustibles, because we're most worried about ember ignitions. And so, closest to the home, we want to work house out. We want to prioritize those areas closest to the home and work house out. But I really want to make it clear, we're not asking for complete removal of vegetation or clear cutting. It's really about what's there and how is it spaced and how is it maintained. And so, expanding on this topic of spacing, we have vertical spacing of vegetation and then horizontal spacing of vegetation. And we have a couple diagrams here that kind of demonstrate what I'm talking about. So you can see on one of the top diagram on the right here, that demonstrates a fire ladder or a fire bridge, which is basically if you have vegetation spaced in a way where it's too continuous, either vertically or horizontally. Say you get one of the lower shrubs on the ground that ignites first, and then that could potentially transfer it to a smaller tree. And then if that smaller tree ignites as well, it could either carry it to your roof or another larger tree. And we don't want those fires reaching the canopies of trees, because that's when they get, difficult to maintain, and that's when they threaten structures as well. So we want to make sure that we don't have too much vertical continuity or horizontal continuity of vegetation, because this would basically just give fire a vector to either reach your house or spread into adjacent wildland areas. And then you'll see that in the diagram on the left here, kind of more in the center of the page, spacing matters depending on the slope. So on flatter slopes, not quite as much spacing is required, but if you have, a steeper slope, fire likes to run uphill. And so that's going to require a little bit more spacing just to make sure that we're eliminating those. And so I'll touch on a few of so earlier this year, we made some changes to our vegetation management standards that are in the city municipal code. And I'll touch on our deadlines for some of the compliance related to those standards. So earlier in the year in February, we brought this to City Council, and we added some immediate zone requirements. So I talked about the immediate zone earlier. That's going to be the most crucial zone to maintain free of combustible material. That's the first 5 feet surrounding any structure on your property. So what that comes down to is basically make sure that you're maintaining vegetation in that zone free of dead or dying material. And then also, if your house has combustible siding like wood shingles or wood paneling, you just want to make sure that, that combustible siding has some clearance from vegetation right next to it. So any shrubs or vines, you want to make sure that that's maintained where it's not contacting that combustible siding. And then we also added Italian cypress and acacia due to some of their plant characteristics that make them quite flammable. And, you can see here in some of these pictures, some of the fire behavior that they encourage. And really the problem with them, if they do ignite, is the ember showers that they could spread, because that's what ends up damaging structures if structures have vulnerabilities. So, so we're working to have all properties in the wildland urban interface, that's the WUI, in compliance by last month, August of this year. And we've gotten a great response from our residents from our defensible space evaluation program. We get tons of voluntary compliance. And of course, we do have our other properties that we need to work with a little bit more to push them in the right direction. But we're working on that and getting a great response. And then for our properties that are not in the wildland urban interface, those properties closer to downtown areas, we're working to have them all in compliance by April of next year. So we're going out in the city, we're doing our inspections and evaluations and letting people know what needs to be done. And we're working with people to make this happen. And so I'll kind of, give you an overview of our defensible space evaluation program and some available resources that you can utilize. So the way our evaluations work is we have a team of about 10 seasonal defensible space evaluators, and we'll assign them to a certain neighborhood or a certain street. And basically what they'll do is they'll go to that neighborhood and they'll go door to door. So nobody's getting singled out. We're trying to get to every single property in the city by the end of this year. And right now, I think we're at about 10,300 different properties that we've evaluated so far, and we're going to continue that. But yeah, so they'll basically go door to door, and they'll do as much of the evaluation as they can from the street or the public right of way, just so we're not wasting your time and we're saving our time as well. And once we gather as much information as we can from the right of way, we'll go up and we'll knock on your door. And if you're home, we'll introduce ourselves, let you know what we're doing there. And if you're available, we'll ask you if you'd like to, take a walk around the entire property, just so we can make sure that your backyard and your side yards are also looking safe. But if you're not there, or if you're not available for a full walk around at that time, then our evaluators, we have informational packets that explain our program and why we were there. And so they'll fill out some information for you and leave you those evacuation tags, the evacuation checklist, a flyer that we have that explains our defensible space program. So they'll leave that at your door if you're not home at that time. And that packet will include some information that you can reach out to us and schedule that full evaluation if you're interested. And we want to get as many full evaluations with folks as we can, just because, properties can look great from the street, but then there could be, some dangers in the backyard that we might be able to help out with. So I hope a lot of you have seen this already or interacted with some of our evaluators. But then we'll touch on some available resources here. So we're working with the MWPA and Fire Safe Marin to coordinate a free curbside chipper program that's been going on since, I believe, May of this year. And we have about 1 month left. So there's still a lot of neighborhoods that have more free chipper weeks coming up. And you see that link under there, www.chipperday.com/Marin. You can go to that website and type in your address, and it'll tell you the dates that you'll have free chipping. And then you'll get a confirmation email. And basically what you do is you remove any vegetation, really, and then you stack it near the curb or somewhere out in front of your property where the crew can easily see it, and they'll come by on the given week, chip it, and haul it away for free. And then the City of San Rafael and the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, the MWPA, will both be rolling out individual grant programs that folks can apply to and get some financial assistance for some of the work that we're asking to be done. Those will be rolling out in the next couple of months. And then the Marin Sanitary Service is also a great resource. So they do bulk pickup days twice a year, once in the fall and then once in the spring. And then they also allow folks to add 2 additional bags of yard waste on every single regular pickup day. And basically the only thing there is you got to make sure that yard waste is in unlined paper bags. So, but then there's their contact number there in case you have any other questions for them. They're a great resource and a partner that we work with. So lastly, we're going to talk about home hardening. So we've talked a lot about vegetation management, and so that's the defensible space surrounding your structure and the landscape surrounding your structure. But then there's also this piece of home hardening. You want to construct and maintain your actual structures so that they're able to defend themselves against ember ignitions, because the flying embers, rather than the actual flaming front, are usually what will get fire started near structures. And so we want to make sure that any vulnerabilities on your structures are mitigated. So we kind of prioritize this roof down, house out, because those exposed areas such as your gutters or your eaves, or areas underneath elevated decks or staircases, those are where embers are going to blow and could potentially get caught up in. And so if there's combustible material like too much leaf litter or pine needles on your roof or in your gutters, that's the perfect light and flashy material. That's what we call it, something sort of kindling like that an ember can get going near your structure. And then, of course, it matters what your home is constructed of. So I have my point here, fire resilient roof and siding materials. So you see in the pictures here, and the one at the top, that's a house with a metal roof, which are becoming more popular now. But also another good roofing option is the Spanish tile style roof that you see. And then to the picture on the right of that, that's showing a house with siding that looks like wood siding, but that's actually cement fiberboard siding, which is much less combustible. So that's going to help out if we have embers blowing in the area. And then the picture in the middle of the page here shows a demonstration, a study that was done about ember ignitions near homes. So the house on the left that's on fire, that's built out of wood shingles, and it had, fine combustible mulch, organic mulch wood chips right up against that house. And you can see how the embers ignited that very easily. And then the structure on the right that has non-combustible siding, and it has hardscaping such as pebbles or rocks or pavers in that immediate zone. And you can see it doesn't have a single ignition. So it really does matter. And then my third point here is vent and chimney protection. So there's newer vent technology where you can harden the vents on your homes, which basically just means vents provide openings for embers to get in and potentially cause ignition inside your house. So we want to just make sure those are sealed up adequately. So there are new vent types where it's a super fine mesh material in the front, and then behind that is a material where at a certain temperature it will expand and fully seal off that opening during a wildfire. And then, of course, for folks who have chimneys, we want them, even if they're not functional anymore, we want to make sure that they have spark arresters or that they're fully sealed up, just because that could still be a potential opening for an ember to sneak down in your structure. And then the last picture here on the bottom right corner, that's just showing a newer style of eave where the eaves are closed, so you don't see those wood rafters coming down. And then you see the vents on the eave there, and those are nice and sealed up. So I believe Kate will now talk about some open space.
Thank you, Simon. So one of the themes that we've been talking about a lot today is that house out approach. And in a lot of areas around Marin County, and especially within San Rafael, that 100-foot zone around your home might run into city-owned land or land owned by other public agencies. And so as part of our strategy to mitigate wildfire in our city, the city's committed to increasing defensible space for your home on our land. And we can do that a couple different ways. The primary ways that we'll create defensible space on our lands are either through manual work, mechanical work, or one of our most popular options, prescribed herbivory, or grazing with goats or sheep, typically. So manual work is, there's a lot of different definitions, but the one that we use to describe our work is work completed by people on the ground with tools in their hands. That could be chainsaw work, a weed whacker, any kind of hand tool or a broom puller, but it's done by hand with people on the ground. And that's a lot more ecologically sound. There's a lot less disturbance to the ground and to the site in general. Mechanical work does play a part. We haven't done any yet, but there are times and places to use more heavy equipment, especially along roadways. It's cost effective. It's easy to move really fast and clear vegetation, especially if it's broom or some other type of continuous fuel from the roadway with this type of equipment. What we see here is called a masticator, and that's a type of heavy equipment that's used a lot more for this type of work. It's a typical excavator you'd see on any construction site, but instead of a shovel at the end, it has, it's called a masticator head. And as the name implies, literally chews up the material as it swings by and redistributes that material in more of a chip form on the ground. That can be raked or left in place. And I just described herbivory. We've been using that a lot in our grassy grassland areas or more open oak woodlands, especially in the defensible space zones behind your houses and along our roadways. So we've been starting a lot of projects this year, and you might have seen some throughout the city. But what we're trying to do with those different types of methods that I just talked about is create what we like to call shaded fuel breaks. And what a shaded fuel break is, and Simon touched on this in his presentation about what you can do around your home, is making sure that we have adequate horizontal discontinuity of fuels and vertical discontinuity of fuels. And we're really trying to break up that fuel loading. So if fire is coming through, there's less chance for it to spread horizontally, plant to plant, and vertically from the ground up into the canopy of trees. So we've been focusing more on shaded fuel breaks, especially in the areas right behind our residential developments on our own lands, and also in areas next to roads, where we also see a lot of ignitions. And what these types of treatments do, they can help slow or stop the spread of wildfire coming from the open space to your home or from your home out into the open space, and really gives us that chance to stop a fire before it can damage both open space and your home. Yeah, so we'll move right into some of the work that we've completed, that's in progress, and future work that we'd like to continue planning. I mentioned before, we've been utilizing goats in multiple grazing areas around the city, mostly in that oak woodland area. On the map, you can see we're all the way up in that top left corner. We've been treating areas in Marinwood, all the way down south through the city of San Rafael, really spread out throughout our city. Yep, keep going. One project that we have in progress right now, and you might have seen it if you've been driving down Coleman Drive at any point this week, is the continued work creating a shaded fuel break along our Mountain Park property in the Lincoln Hill, San Rafael Hill neighborhoods. This project was initiated before our San Rafael Hill fire earlier this year. And in response to that, we're going to continue our work, especially behind the homes on Graceland Drive, Coleman Drive, and around Chula Vista Drive. What's interesting about this, we've also treated our fire road up at the top of the hill, and that did impact, in a positive way, the suppression response to that fire. So it's been really rewarding to see our work work in real life, and that's a good incentive to keep going with this. Next slide. So moving into some of our future plans, we do want to do a lot of fire road vegetation clearance, and this really helps improve emergency responder access to some of these wildland areas. If we can get people in safely to these areas, we can stop a fire before it reaches the wildland urban interface and where our residential developments are. We are hoping to start this work in November, and we'll be notifying people as that plan progresses. In sort of the same area, that San Pedro Mountain, there's multiple different land holdings. City of San Rafael owns land. It's adjacent to state park land with China Camp, and also Marin County Parks land as well. So we are implementing a shaded fuel break in the defensible space zone behind residential developments that's spanning across San Rafael owned open space, as well as state park owned open space, and a couple areas on private lands where it's beneficial to the rest of the community to implement work there. These are the shaded fuel breaks that I explained before, really light touch work with that manual method. Spanning up to the north, more the Lucas Valley Marinwood area, we are planning another shaded field break, this time in collaboration with Marin County Parks. Again, we're spanning across jurisdictions. We know fire doesn't know boundaries, and so we're going to implement our work in a way that makes sense on the ground to create that continuity of a field break to protect the residential developments in between there and the wildland areas, this time county parks. That work is also scheduled to start in November. So we're gonna have a really busy month. Getting into some more future projects that are still in the planning stages. We're looking at treating the interface of the Terra Linda Sleepy Hollow Divide on the Terra Linda side, which is San Rafael's jurisdiction. You can tell that there's not the type of polygons that we had before with the treatment areas because we're still developing those. But this plan is going to be really similar to the ones that we saw in the previous slides. And then moving even farther into the future, we want to treat all of our open space where defensible space, your defensible space runs into our lands. And we've got a lot of work ahead of us. As you can see from this map, all those magenta parcels are city-owned lands. And what's unique about our city is just the amount of open space that we own. It's over 1,000 acres. And a lot of them, especially the parcels that you see here, are surrounded entirely by residential development. So the more work that we can do to create a safer environment within those parcels, the better it is for our community as a whole. So this is just a little bit of a highlight of what we're planning in the next 18 months or so and what we've already done. And that really leads us to our next topic, which is preventing ignitions in the first place. And we can do all the work in the world, but the success of our whole strategy is really preventing ignitions. And I'll turn it back to Quinn to wrap us up.
Thanks, Kate, and thanks, Simon. I think it's so important to note, we're following that house out approach too. And so I know that there's folks that are concerned about the tree 500 feet from any home. And while in some cases that might be of concern, our prioritization is going to be starting closest to homes and working our way out with the end goal of eventually, really treating all of our space. But we want to create those buffers first. But really, if we do all this work in case the fire happens, but our ultimate goal is let's not have the fires happen. As you might have heard, that the recent fire up in Lucas Valley, the Mount Lassen fire, was the result of landscaping equipment being used, and metal hits rock, creates spark. It's that dry. And so we really want to make sure, and I just want to touch on this, that we're all doing our part. And so that includes responsible time outdoors, whether it relates to mowing, using weed eaters, grills. If you're in the open space, you're not dropping cigarette butts, you're disposing of all of that type of material correctly. Responsible driving, tow chains and actually blown tires, which obviously is a little bit harder to control, do start fires every year. So make sure you're not dragging tow chains. Make sure you're parking in places where you should. One of the early projects we did this year, kind of right after the little bit of rain we had stopped, was to go out and make sure we were mowing back and trimming all of those potential parking areas. Mufflers get hot. All it takes is someone driving off road with a car sometimes into taller grass. One of the fires that started after 101 a couple years ago was a motorcycle muffler in tall grass. So these aren't things we make up. They really happen, and that's why we want to prevent them. And then we've got, we want to make sure we're also doing our part to reduce ignitions. We do have open space police rangers employed with the city, as well as, of course, there's folks doing similar work across the county, but they particularly patrol our open space, removing any ignitions. We put a lot of effort into that too on red flag warning days, so that we can prevent any ignition source. So illegal camp stoves, lighters, anything like that. So if you've got any concern about any type of illegal activity in the open space, they're there to help, and please call those into our police department. And then educational efforts. So we will put out red flags, we hang red flags, but what does a red flag mean? And there's going to be more educational efforts coming out around that, but that's particularly when we want you to pay attention to things like mowing and driving. But a red flag warning means the conditions are prime for a fire. If a fire starts, it's going to get big and it's going to move fast really quickly because the fuels are really dry, the humidities are really low, and the winds are predicted to be really high. So we'll continue those educational efforts. There's a lot of different signage efforts going on with FireWise communities and all sorts of things so that we can prevent those ignitions in the first place. However, I hope we've spent, about the last hour helping you understand all the other things we're doing to slow and stop the spread and prevent the spread of wildfire and the impact it could have on our community. So with that, I want to just go to our contact slide. This is the first two pieces of information are direct to our defensible space program. So if you've got a question about you want an evaluation done at your property, you're concerned about follow-up on something that might be outstanding, you can call that team directly and they'll reach out. If you have questions about open space as well, you can reach out to that information. They'll forward it over to Kate and she'll be able to get back to you as well. Or you can call our general fire administration line, the 3304 number, and our administrative assistants will route you to whoever is going to be the best person to answer your question. And then, of course, our website, srfd.org, you can get to that off the city site. It's a great resource. We've got a ton of information on there, links, videos, all sorts of good stuff. So please check that out with any information. With that, there was one question that came in with the chat that I want to address to everybody, and then I'll stop recording and open it up to additional questions. The distinction between city and county and Marinwood and CSAs, and I certainly understand that can be confusing. The city has first response kind of in our geographic zone. There are areas like Santa Benicia, for example, where our fire resources are the first to respond, but we don't actually have the prevention authority there. And so that inspection program is run by the county defensible space inspection program. However, with the MWPA, we do have a county-wide program for defensible space evaluations. And that is really important. And we're super appreciative of those county-wide efforts. But the way the MWPA is structured, there are some projects that we as the city will take the lead on. And specifically for Marinwood, because we are the San Rafael and Marinwood sort of hybrid fire departments, we do a lot of work with Marinwood and support their efforts. We are the lead agency for our zone for the MWPA, but we also, like Kate mentioned, work with county parks and state parks and all sorts of other landowners. But some of the MWPA funding is very specific to the city or to Marinwood or to county residents. And then some of the MWPA funding is specific to a geographic zone. So our roadside clearance projects, for example, that funding is specific to the geographic zone. So the city might be leading roadside efforts in county areas. I know it is confusing. Just know the MWPA, we're all working really closely together. We're addressing risk at the broad scale. We've already done some, projects on the border that cross the border. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to any of these contact information. And if we're not the right people, we'll get you over the right person at the county or the other jurisdiction and vice versa. So with that, I'm going to stop recording. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to join us. And if you're watching this at a later time, again, please reach out if you have questions as well.